Gravel crunched under the bespoke tread of Italian leather loafers. Claire kicked a flat stone, watching it skitter across the cracked shoulder of Highway 14. Heat radiated invisible, shimmering waves off the obsidian hood of her $250,000 electric concept car. The vehicle was supposed to be the crown jewel of her company's upcoming quarterly reveal. Instead, it was a 2-ton paperweight baking under the merciless Nevada sun. Claire checked her phone for the 7th time. Still no signal. A single drop of sweat crawled down her spine, pooling at the waistband of her tailored trousers. She hated sweating. She hated the loss of control even more. The dashboard had simply flashed a generic error code before the drivetrain locked up entirely, killing the air conditioning and the power steering in one fell swoop. Her chief engineer was going to be fired by sunset. If she survived the afternoon, silence out here wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. It pressed against her eardrums, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the dry rustle of scrub brush. The smell of melting asphalt and hot ozone hung thick in the dead air. Then, a sound. It started as a raspy, uneven rattle, echoing off the distant red rock formations. Claire stepped away from the sleek flank of her dead prototype, squinting into the glare. A vehicle crested the slight rise in the road. Calling it a car felt overly generous. It was a late 80s station wagon, a patchwork quilt of automotive despair. The front left fender was primer gray, the hood a faded, oxidized blue, and the passenger door looked like it had been salvaged from a scrap heap. The muffler dragged slightly, sparking against the tarmac. Claire crossed her arms, her posture instinctively shifting into the rigid, defensive stance she used in boardrooms. She was a billionaire CEO, accustomed to fleets of black SUVs and deferential drivers. She was not accustomed to hailing down rolling dumpsters. The wagon slowed, brakes squealing like a dying animal, and crunched to a halt a few yards from her. Dust washed over Claire's ankles. She coughed, waving a manicured hand in front of her face. The driver's side window was already rolled down. The man sitting there looked like he had been baked into the upholstery. He wore a faded, grease-stained t-shirt that clung to his shoulders, and a baseball cap pulled low over tired, deep-set eyes. Dark stubble shadowed a sharp jawline. He didn't look like a savior. He looked exhausted, irritated, and roughly 5 seconds away from driving off. "Dead?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, dry as the dirt beneath his tires. Claire forced a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A minor software fault. My team is likely already tracking the telemetry, but a lift to the nearest cell tower wouldn't go unrewarded." The man leaned forward, resting a forearm heavily on the window frame. He didn't look at her. He was looking at her car. His gaze tracked over the flush door handles, the aerodynamic contours, and the massive low-profile tires. "Software fault," he repeated flatly. "Right. Well, nearest tower with a prayer of a signal is 20 miles east at the old gas station. Get in." Claire hesitated. She looked at the rusted door handle of the wagon, then at the man. He hadn't offered a name. He hadn't offered a bottle of water. He was just a guy in a junker. "I appreciate the offer," Claire said, her tone dripping with the kind of practiced corporate condescension she usually reserved for underperforming vice presidents. "But I think I'd rather wait in my vehicle. I'm sure someone from my security detail will be along shortly. Besides, I'm not entirely convinced your car could make it 20 miles. It just slipped out. The stress, the heat, the ruined silk blouse, she couldn't help it. A short, dry laugh escaped her throat. It was cruel, and she knew it. But looking at his $300 rusted tin can sitting next to her masterpiece of engineering was profoundly absurd. The man's jaw tightened. A muscle leaped in his cheek. He didn't yell. He didn't defend his vehicle. He just stared at her with a quiet, hollow intensity that made the hair on her arm stand up. "Look, lady," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing any trace of passive compliance. "It's 106 degrees out here. In an hour, that black metal box of yours is going to be an oven. I don't care how much money is sitting in your bank account. Dehydration doesn't give a damn about your net worth. You can wait for your security detail, or you can get in the wagon. I'm not asking twice." From the back seat, a small voice piped up. "Dad, can we go? It's hot." Claire shifted her gaze. In the back, strapped into a car seat that looked far too worn, was a boy of about 7. His hair was messy, and he was clutching a battered plastic action figure. He looked at Claire with wide, solemn eyes. Guilt, sharp and unfamiliar, pricked the back of Claire's neck. She was arguing with a desperate-looking single father on the side of a highway while a child sweltered in the back. She looked back at her dead car. Her pride fought a brief, violent battle with her survival instinct. Survival won. "Fine," Claire snapped, marching toward the passenger side. "Pop the lock." The interior of the wagon smelled exactly like Claire expected, only worse. It was a dense, cloying mixture of old motor oil, stale French fries, cheap laundry detergent, and hot, dusty fabric. The passenger seat was covered in cracked vinyl that immediately pinched her legs through her trousers. Beneath her feet, the floor mat was tacky with some long spilled, dried liquid. "Close the door hard," the man said. "Latch sticks." Claire slammed the door. It bounced back open. She gritted her teeth, grabbed the handle, and yanked it shut with an uncharacteristic grunt of exertion. This time, it caught with a sickening metal-on-metal scrape. "Adriel," the man said, shifting the car into drive with a grinding clunk. "Claire," she replied, staring straight ahead through the bug-splattered windshield. "That's Lane," Adriel added, jerking his chin toward the rearview mirror. Claire didn't look back. She just nodded stiffly. "I'll compensate you for the fuel and your time, Adriel," heavily. "Keep your money," Adriel said. He stepped on the gas pedal. The acceleration was jarring, not because it was fast, but because of the violent shudder that seized the entire chassis of the wagon. The dashboard vibrated so hard that a plastic Jesus glued above the radio looked like it was having a seizure. Loose panels rattled. The suspension groaned over every microscopic crack in the pavement, and hot wind howled through the gaps in the window seals. Claire gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles white. She was terrified the car would disintegrate at 60 miles per hour. "Are you sure this is safe?" she demanded, over the noise of rattling plastic. Adriel rubbed a hand over his face, smearing a streak of grease across his cheekbone. "It's fine. Just needs new motor mounts, and a suspension, and tires." "Then why are you driving it?" The question was out before she could filter it. It was the CEO in her, the woman who optimized supply chains and eliminated inefficiencies. To her, tolerating a broken machine was a sign of a broken mind. Adriel's knuckles went pale on the cracked steering wheel. "Because it runs," he said quietly. "And because when your wife dies from pancreatic cancer, and the medical bills eat your house, your savings, and your 401k, you don't exactly get to walk into a dealership and pick out a luxury EV." The air inside the sweltering car suddenly felt ice cold. Claire swallowed hard. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with her intrusive blunder and his raw, unshielded reality. She wanted to apologize, but the words felt like ash in her mouth. She was accustomed to writing checks to fix problems. She had no currency for this kind of grief. I see," she finally murmured, looking out the window at the passing blur of scrub brush. To break the crushing tension, Claire forced herself to focus on the mechanical environment instead of the human one. As a former electrical engineer who had clawed her way to the executive suite, analyzing systems was her safety blanket. She tuned out the chaotic rattling of the loose trim and the screeching wind. She listened closer. Underneath the cacophony of a dying chassis, there was something missing. The deep, guttural thrum of internal combustion. The rhythmic vibration of pistons firing. She placed the flat of her palm against the transmission tunnel between the seats. The metal was warm, but it wasn't vibrating with the harsh, uneven frequency of an old gas engine. Instead, there was a sound she felt more than heard. A high, ultra-smooth, oscillating whine. It was faint, buried under the noise of the bad suspension, but it was there. It sounded exactly like the magnetic bearings in the high-speed centrifuges at her R&D labs. She frowned, looking at the dashboard. The speedometer was broken, the needle resting at 0 while they hurtled down the road. The fuel gauge was taped over with black electrical tape. "Your engine," Claire said, her voice dropping its haughty edge, replaced by genuine clinical curiosity. It doesn't sound like an inline four. Adriel's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, checking on Lane, then flicked to Claire. For a split second, something guarded and sharp flashed in his expression. It's been modified, he said shortly. Modified how? You've eliminated the exhaust drone almost entirely. And the torque delivery off the line back there? I patched up the exhaust manifold last week. Adriel interrupted, his tone final. And the transmission slips. That's why the torque feels weird. Just old garbage holding together by rust and habit. He was lying. Claire knew engineers, and she knew mechanics. The way he deflected, the sudden tension in his shoulders, he was hiding something. But before she could press the issue, Adriel hit the brakes. The wagon veered off the highway, tires crunching onto a sprawling lot of cracked concrete and dry weeds. In the center sat an abandoned gas station from the 1970s, the pumps long ago ripped out, leaving rusted concrete islands. Attached to the side of the convenience store was a corrugated aluminum garage, its massive bay door partially rolled up, revealing cool, deep shadows inside. Home sweet home, Adriel muttered. He killed the ignition. The high-frequency whine spun down to silence, leaving only the ticking of hot metal. Claire sat frozen for a second, her brain trying to process the auditory signature of what had just happened. That wasn't an engine shutting off. That was a rotor spinning down in a vacuum. The heat hit Claire like a physical blow the moment she stepped out of the wagon. The air was dead, smelling of baked dust and dried sage. Adriel was already at the back door, unbuckling Lane. The boy scrambled out, kicking up a cloud of dirt, and ran straight into the shadowy garage without a word. Phone is inside, Adriel said, not looking back as he followed his son. It's a landline. Cellular repeater on the roof sometimes picks up a signal from the ridge, but it's spotty. Claire followed, her Italian loafers scuffing against the ruined concrete. She stepped over the threshold into the garage. It was 10 degrees cooler inside, smelling sharply of copper wire, soldering flux, and cutting fluid. It didn't smell like an old auto shop. There was no overwhelming stench of gasoline or heavy gear oil. She scanned the room. The walls were lined with cheap metal shelving, bowing under the weight of not car parts. They were stacked with oscilloscopes, heavy-gauge copper spools, industrial capacitors, and raw ingots of what looked like neodymium. In the corner sat a massive CNC milling machine, humming softly on standby, looking completely out of place in a derelict gas station. Phone's by the sink, Adriel called out. He was standing by the front of the station wagon, popping the hood latch. Claire walked to a grime-stained sink. Hanging on the wall next to a greasy towel was an ancient cream-colored rotary phone. She picked up the receiver and pressed it to her ear. Nothing. Not even a dial tone. Just the faint, rhythmic crackle of static. She slammed the receiver back onto the cradle, a fresh wave of panic and frustration rising in her chest. "It's dead," she snapped. Adriel sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. He had propped the faded blue hood of the wagon open. "Give it a minute. The wind knocks the repeater dish out of alignment. I'll have to climb up and fix it." "I don't have a minute, Adriel. I have a board meeting in 3 hours that determines the future of a $60 billion company. My car is dead on the highway. My phone is a brick, and your landline is useless." Her voice was rising, shrill and unpleasant. The stress was cracking her veneer, exposing the terrified, exhausted woman underneath the tailored clothes. Adriel didn't yell back. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. He threw the dirty rag onto the workbench. "Lady, the desert doesn't care about your board meeting. Panic all you want. It won't make the electrons move any faster." He turned his back to her, leaning over the engine bay of the wagon, reaching inside with a wrench. Claire stood trembling, her fists clenched. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. Instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force the corporate stoicism back into her spine. She paced heavily across the concrete floor, her shoes clicking a frantic rhythm. She walked past the front of the wagon. She didn't mean to look. She was just a woman pacing out her anxiety in a hot room. But as she passed the open hood, her peripheral vision caught a glare of polished metal where there should have been a greasy block of cast iron. She stopped. She took one step backward. Adriel was tightening a bolt on a bracket, oblivious to her sudden paralysis. Claire stared into the engine bay. The air left her lungs in a sharp, involuntary hiss. The original inline-4 engine was gone. In its place, bolted to the rusted, reinforced frame of the 1987 chassis, was a piece of technology that looked like it had been dropped out of a low-orbit satellite. It was a compact, cylindrical power plant, no larger than a watermelon. The outer casing was machined from billet aluminum, gleaming in the dim light, etched with intricate thermal dissipation fins. But that wasn't what made Claire's heart hammer against her ribs. It was the wiring. Braided lines of superconducting material technology her R&D department said was 10 years away from commercial viability, snaked from the central cylinder to a heavily shielded, custom-built inverter. Surrounding the cylinder was a polyphase magnetic induction stator suspended in what looked like a vacuum-sealed housing. What is that? Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the CNC machine in the corner. Adriel froze. His hand tightened on the wrench. Slowly, he stood up, his broad shoulders blocking part of her view. It's the engine. No, it's not. Claire stepped closer, her fear of the desert entirely forgotten, replaced by a consuming, terrifying awe. She reached out, her trembling fingers hovering inches from the cooling fins. This is an axial flux motor. But the power density required to move a car this heavy, with a motor this small, the heat would melt the copper coils in 3 seconds. Unless you bypass standard liquid cooling and use a closed-loop phase change refrigerant, Adriel said quietly. His voice had changed. The rough, dismissive drawl was gone. He sounded precise. Clinical. Claire's eyes snapped up to his face. Phase change? You mean you're using evaporative cooling inside the stator housing? That's impossible. The pressure differentials would blow the seals. We've spent $300 million trying to stabilize the pressure algorithms. She trailed off. She realized what she was saying. She realized who she was talking to. She looked at the man in the grease-stained shirt. She looked at the peeling paint of the wagon. Then she looked back at the motor. There were no massive battery packs weighing the car down. Just a small, dense bank of solid-state cells, another technology the world thought was years away, tucked neatly against the firewall. Her multi-million-dollar prototype was dead on the highway because its conventional cooling loop had failed under the desert heat. This man had driven through the same heat, hauling a 2-ton steel cage, using a motor the size of a watermelon that hadn't even broken a sweat. "Who are you?" Claire asked, her voice cracking. The cynical billionaire CEO was gone. In her place was an engineer, staring at a miracle forged in a rusted tin can. Adriel tossed the wrench onto the workbench. It landed with a loud, final clatter. He looked at her, his eyes hard and infinitely tired. "I'm just a guy trying to get his kid to school," he said softly. "Now back away from the car." Dust motes, suspended in the stale garage, air caught the harsh slant of afternoon sun, drifting lazily over the impossible machine. Claire couldn't move. Her meticulously cultivated posture, the armor she wore to dominate boardrooms and crush competitors, dissolved entirely. She was just a woman, staring at a ghost. "Back away!" Adriel repeated, his voice devoid of the earlier heat. It was terrifyingly calm now. Claire took a half-step back, her Italian leather heels scraping harshly against the concrete. She didn't look at him. Her eyes remained locked on the braided, superconducting lines. "I have 200 engineers in a glass tower in Silicon Valley," Claire said, her voice hollow, stripped of its usual commanding cadence. "They have a budget of $400 million. They told me last Tuesday that solid-state integration, at this scale, violates the laws of thermodynamics. They said phase change cooling in an axial flux stator would detonate under load." Adriel picked up a greasy rag and slowly wiped grease from his knuckles. They're overthinking the pressure differential. If you use a variable geometry restrictor valve off a salvaged commercial HVAC unit, it regulates the boil-off perfectly. Cost me $12 at a junkyard. Claire finally looked up at him. $12. And a lot of trial and error, Adriel muttered, looking away. He walked over to a battered mini-fridge in the corner, yanked it open, and pulled out a generic bottle of water. He tossed it to her. She caught it clumsily against her chest. The plastic was dripping with condensation. The sudden, biting cold against her damp silk blouse was a shock to her system. "You didn't build this to revolutionize the automotive industry," Claire stated, her analytical brain finally booting back up, trying to force this absurd reality into a logical framework. "You aren't trying to sell it. It's sitting in a 1987 station wagon with a rusted muffler." "Muffler's just there for show," Adriel said, taking a swig from his own bottle. "Keeps the cops from asking questions. Cops see an old junker, they expect it to sound like garbage. I bolted a hollowed-out catalytic converter to the undercarriage and rigged a tiny speaker inside to play a looped audio file of a bad idol. People hear what they expect to hear." Claire unscrewed the cap of her water, taking a slow, measured sip. The water tasted vaguely of copper, but it was freezing, and it brought her back to her senses. Her predatory instincts, the ones that had built her empire, began to twitch. "Who did you steal it from, Adriel?" The question hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Adriel stopped drinking. He lowered the plastic bottle. The silence in the garage thickened, broken only by the faint, rhythmic thrumming of the CNC machine and the distant sound of Lane playing with his action figure in the back office. "Excuse me?" Adriel said softly. "I know every major player in the aerospace and automotive propulsion sectors," Claire pressed, stepping forward, her fear replaced by a cold, calculating adrenaline. "I know DARPA's current white papers. I know what MIT is researching. This tech doesn't exist in the private sector. It certainly doesn't exist in a ruined gas station off Highway 14. So, where did you take it from?" Adriel didn't yell. He didn't defend himself. He just looked at her with a profound, exhausting pity. "You people," he whispered, shaking his head. "You think innovation only happens in glass towers. You think brilliance requires a stock option and a catered cafeteria." He walked over to the metal shelving unit, his heavy boots scuffing the floor. He pulled down a battered, fireproof lockbox, set it on the workbench, and popped the latch. He rummaged through a stack of yellowed papers and pulled out a heavy, metallic badge. He tossed it onto the workbench between them. Claire stepped closer. The badge was etched with the logo of a defunct, highly classified aerospace contractor that had gone bankrupt 5 years ago. "I was a senior propulsion specialist," Adriel said, leaning against the shelving, arms crossed over his stained shirt. "I was working on drone thruster efficiency. Then Sarah got sick. The company liquidated. My insurance evaporated. I spent 2 years watching my wife waste away while pharmaceutical companies bled us dry." He looked past Claire, staring at the rusted hood of the wagon. "After she died, I had nothing. Just a house facing foreclosure, a mountain of debt, and a 5-year-old kid who needed to see a pediatric specialist in Phoenix twice a month. Phoenix is 300 miles away. Gas was $5 a gallon. I couldn't afford to drive him." Claire swallowed hard. The water in her stomach suddenly felt like lead. "So, I took the scrap," Adriel continued, his voice monotone, reciting a trauma he had replayed 1,000 times. "I took the failed prototypes I'd kept in my garage. I ripped the blown V8 out of this wagon, and I started building. I didn't build it to save the world, Claire. I built it so I wouldn't have to choose between buying groceries and taking my son to his doctor. Desperation makes you see solutions that comfortable engineers miss." Claire looked at the engine block again. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a monument to grief. It was a father's desperate, furious refusal to let his world collapse. "Adriel," Claire started, her voice softening, losing its corporate edge. This is a paradigm shift. If you patent this, the medical debt, the foreclosure, it all goes away. You would be a billionaire." Adriel let out a short, scraping laugh. "Patent it? With what lawyers? The second I file a patent, A company like yours will bury me in litigation. You'll claim prior art, or you'll bleed me dry in court until I have to sell it to you for pennies just to keep the lights on. I know how the game is played. That's why it stays hidden under a rusted hood. He was right. Claire knew he was right. If her competitors found out about this, they would crush him. Hell, if she had found out about this yesterday, she would have instructed her legal team to crush him. But yesterday, she hadn't sat in a sweltering junk car, smelling old vinyl, watching a single father risk everything just to keep moving forward. I need to make a phone call, Claire said quietly. Told you, landline's dead. Repeater dish is out of alignment, then fix it. Claire looked him dead in the eye. Please. Adriel stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for the trap. Finding nothing but a desperate, strange sincerity, he grabbed a wrench and turned toward the back door. Give me 5 minutes. Heavy boots thumped against the corrugated tin roof, echoing through the empty garage like dull drum beats. Claire paced near the sink, the cream-colored receiver of the rotary phone pressed hard against her ear. For 3 minutes, there was nothing but static. Then, a sharp pop, and the glorious, continuous drone of a dial tone. She quickly dialed the direct line to her chief operating officer.
Hastings, a frantic voice answered on the second ring. Claire? Are you alive? We lost telemetry on the concept car. We have helicopters spinning up to search Highway 14.
Call them off, David, Claire said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual booming authority. She sounded exhausted. She felt exhausted. Claire, what happened? The board is panicking. The quarterly reveal is in 2 weeks. If the prototype is a brick, our stock is going to freefall. The prototype is a brick, Claire confirmed, staring out the open bay door at the blinding desert light. The thermal management system completely collapsed. It's a fundamental design flaw. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, a quiet, panicked curse. Claire, this will ruin us. No, it won't, Claire said, turning to look at the watermelon-sized engine sitting in the rusted wagon. Cancel the quarterly reveal. Postpone it by 6 months. Are you insane? We'll bleed capital. Let it bleed. I've found something else. Claire paused, her fingers tracing the grimy edge of the sink. She thought about the $12 junkyard HVAC valve. She thought about a father cannibalizing aerospace scrap to save his son. David, draft an independent contractor agreement. Completely open-ended. Autonomous R&D division. No corporate oversight. Full intellectual property retention for the creator, with an exclusive, unfireable licensing deal for us. Claire, what are you talking about? Who are we hiring? A mechanic, Claire said softly. I'll call you tonight. She hung up before David could protest. Adriel walked back into the garage, wiping sweat from his forehead. He tossed the wrench onto a shelf. You get through? I did, Claire said. She turned to face him. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't stand perfectly straight. She let her shoulders slump slightly, allowing the fatigue and the humanity to show through the tailored suit. My board wanted to send a helicopter for me. I told them no. Adriel frowned, wiping grease from his hands again. Why? Because I need a ride back to my car. 10 minutes later, they were back on Highway 14. The air conditioning in the wagon was broken, but Adriel had rolled the windows down, and the hot desert wind whipped violently through the cabin. Lane was asleep in the back seat, his small head resting against the stained fabric, completely undisturbed by the rattling of the chassis. Claire sat in the passenger seat, gripping the door handle as the wagon violently shuddered over a pothole. She wasn't afraid anymore. She felt the smooth, frictionless hum of the motor beneath her, the terrifying power hidden beneath the rust. Up ahead, shimmering in the heat haze, the black silhouette of her $250,000 electric concept car sat dead on the shoulder. Adriel pulled the wagon over, the brakes squealing in protest, parking a few feet behind the sleek, useless machine. He threw the car into park and cut the engine. The high-pitched whine spun down to silence. End of the line, Adriel said, keeping his hands on the steering wheel. Claire didn't move to open the door. She sat looking at her car. The flush door handles, the carbon fiber trim, the aerodynamic perfection. It was beautiful. And it was completely, undeniably obsolete. I called my COO, Claire said, not looking at Adriel. I told him our multi-million-dollar cooling system failed. Adriel grunted softly. Sorry to hear that. I also told him to draft a contract. Claire turned her head, looking at the tired, sharp angles of Adriel's face. I'm not going to steal your engine, Adriel, and I'm not going to buy it either. Because if I buy it, my engineers will just ruin it, trying to make it mass-producible for luxury sedans. Adriel tightened his grip on the wheel. I already told you, I'm not. I want to license it, Claire interrupted, her voice firm but lacking its usual corporate venom. You keep the patent. You keep the blueprints. You stay in your garage, or you move to a facility of your choosing. You build the motors. My company buys them from you. We put them in our chassis. You get a royalty on every single vehicle sold, 10%. Adriel slowly turned his head. His eyes narrowed. 10% of a vehicle's gross sale price? For a powertrain license? It's unheard of, Claire agreed. My board is going to scream. They're going to threaten to oust me. But once I put your wagon on a dynamometer and show them the telemetry, they'll shut up and sign the checks. You'll be able to afford 50 specialists for Lane. You can buy Phoenix. Adriel stared at her. The wind outside howled softly, kicking up a spray of fine red sand against the windshield. He looked at her perfectly manicured hands, resting on the cracked vinyl of his ruined car. He looked for the lie. He looked for the corporate shark waiting to snap her jaws shut. But Claire just looked back, her eyes reflecting the glaring sunlight. She wasn't smiling. It wasn't a friendly offer. It was a desperate, honest plea from a woman who had just realized her entire empire was built on sand. You're serious, Adriel whispered. Dead serious. Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek titanium pen. She looked around the trash-strewn cabin, grabbed a crumpled, grease-stained napkin from the floorboard, and smoothed it out on her knee. She scribbled a few lines on the paper, outlining the basic terms, and signed her name at the bottom. She held the pen and the napkin out to him. It won't hold up in court, Claire said, but it's a start. We'll get the real paperwork drawn up next week. I need to know you won't drive away and disappear. Adriel looked at the greasy napkin. He looked at the titanium pen. Then he looked in the rearview mirror at his son, sleeping soundly through the blistering heat. Slowly, his rough, calloused hand reached out. He took the pen. He didn't say thank you. He didn't smile. He just pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name in sharp, jagged letters. My suspension is shot, Adriel said quietly, handing the napkin back to her. Claire folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into her breast pocket. I know. And my brakes are metal on metal. I heard. Adriel put the car in drive. Then we better get out of here before the tires pop. The station wagon groaned, rattled, and violently shuddered as it pulled back onto the cracked asphalt of Highway 14. Behind them, the obsidian, $250,000 prototype sat baking in the dead sun, a monument to a world that had just been left behind in a cloud of cheap exhaust. Thank you for watching this story. If this tale of raw grit, sacrifice, and true innovation beating corporate greed hit home for you, drop a like to support the channel. What would you do if you were Adriel? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. Don't forget to hit that share button so others can experience this journey, and subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss our next deeply human story.